You know how there are some people out there that you just shouldn't mess with? There are some folks that just can't take a joke or who get offended at any little perceived slight. And then there are people like that who are also unhinged. I managed to get through 30 years of my life without encountering such a person until last week. His name was Bob Woodford, and I prank called him. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who makes prank calls anymore? Well, to me, prank calling is a lost art. I've been pranking randoms since I was in middle school. The older I get, the better I get. I'm not sure why I'm so invested in messing with people, I don't know, but God, did I love it. As I said, I considered prank calls an art, so I invested a lot of time and energy into becoming one of the best. Once it got harder to cold call people because nobody answers their phones, I started to get creative. Do you have any idea how much information you put out on social media for just anyone to find? I do. That's how I picked Bob as my target last week. Bob owned a small construction business that was mainly just him. Solid fellow Bob, 58 years old, married for 35 of those years, and generally seemed like a nice guy. Lots of pictures of his wife, turtles, a boat, and various home renovation projects on his Facebook. He even listed both his work and a personal cell phone. Foolish. I took a weekend to plan my strategy for maximum impact. I started with a call to Bob's personal phone, while I knew he'd be at work. I told him I worked in the doctor's office, his wife recently visited, and that I needed her phone number. He just gave it to me without question. I could tell Bob loved his wife very much, so I decided to use that for the prank. I started calling Mrs. Woodford at all hours of the day and night, spoofing my number so it appeared like I was calling from dozens of phones. I sent her text as well, usually only a few words, like, "Hey, how are you?" or "What time was that thing again?" I doubted she showed the messages to Bob. She might have even thought it was all scammers and robocalls, but I was just laying the foundation for my prank. Next, I started calling Bob, pretending to be a potential client for his business. I'd set up sessions to talk to him about estimates for home renovation projects, then give him phony addresses. He'd show up to the fake appointments and talk to homeowners who had no idea who he was or what he was talking about. I'd usually park my car somewhere in the neighborhood so I could watch these interactions. Bob was a calm guy, but I could tell all the prank job offers were getting under his skin. The economy is in a rough spot, and I was wasting 2 or 3 hours of his day getting him to drive all over town. Bob lost his temper a few times. After nearly a week of this treatment, he was posting angry rants all over Facebook. I could have stopped them. Should have stopped them, but I had a few more prank phone calls to make. I waited until I knew Mrs. Woodford would be asleep. She had on her Facebook that she hated missing her favorite show when it aired on TV, but that she was always in bed before it premiered at 9 p.m. Once I figured she was out, I began calling her phone from multiple numbers again, only this time I left voicemails. The kind of voicemails that implied Mrs. Woodford was having multiple affairs. I sent texts too. "Hey babe, I tried calling you, but it seems you were asleep. Tomorrow I'll be coming over when Bob leaves." Then I called Bob. I knew he'd be awake due to all of the stress. He'd gone through a full week of phantom estimates and constant harassing calls. My final prank call to Bob was my masterpiece as an actor. I claimed that I was a used car salesman named Frank and that I was having an affair with his wife. Bob was angry but didn't believe me at first. I told him that the guilt was too much for me to bear, and if he wanted proof, he should check his wife's phone when she's not looking. I watched Bob hesitate. I say watched because I had to see the fallout from the prank calls in person. I parked my car right outside the Woodford's house, and I could see Bob clearly through the window in his workshop. He put down his phone, hand clearly shaking, then walked into the house where I couldn't see him. After a few minutes, a very pale Bob walked back to his workshop. He must have checked his wife's phone. I waited for the fireworks. Bob didn't say a word. He didn't scream or flip tables. In fact, I watched him calmly hang up the phone while I was waiting on the other line. That was disappointing. Obviously, I wasn't trying to destroy Bob's marriage, but I was hoping the prank calls would cause a little freakout. Instead, I watched Bob start pulling tools from the walls in his shop. My blood went cold when he took a nail gun in one hand and a sledgehammer in the other, and went back into the house. I was frozen. Bob wouldn't. I didn't believe he'd ever hurt his wife over a prank. Maybe he was going to fix something, I thought. My options were limited. I debated calling 911 or running up to their door. Maybe I could explain that everything was a joke, but as heated as Bob was, I wasn't sure that was a smart move on my end. After about 15 minutes of sitting in my car patiently waiting, the decision was made for me when the screaming started. A woman screaming in agony. Then, silence. Bob opened the door and walked out onto his lawn. I could see him clearly. The moon was full and his neighborhood had streetlights. His face was slack, blank. His t-shirt and jeans were covered in blood. He was still holding the nail gun and sledgehammer. I guess I'd pushed him too far. Maybe there were existing marriage issues that I didn't know about, or maybe his business was doing worse than I thought. Whatever the reason, it was clear that Bob had snapped. Suddenly, Bob began to weep. Maybe the shock had worn off and he'd realized what exactly he had done. He dropped both the nail gun and the sledgehammer and walked slowly back into his house. I finally decided to follow him, slipping out of my car and walking towards the Woodfords. My first stop was the bedroom, where I confirmed it. Mrs. Woodford was dead. She was nailed to the bed with her face smashed in like bust-open watermelon. The entire room was painted red with what you can imagine. It was a hard sight to watch, especially with the guilt burning down on my shoulders, knowing that this was all my fault. I got shocked and started to hyperventilate, as it was too much to bear. Eventually, I composed myself and called the cops. A few minutes later, sirens were going off nearby, and I could see the police lights flashing through the window. The cops eventually came in and found Bob sitting on a work stool in the back room, with wide eyes and a blank face. The cops tried talking to him, but Bob didn't say a word. It seemed that the whole event had paralyzed his entire being. The cops handcuffed him and slowly took him away and drove off with him. I stood there and stared at the car as it drove off with a guilt-ridden face. I never saw Bob again, and I'm deeply saddened by what my careless actions have caused. These days, I don't make prank calls anymore.
It was a Friday night, roughly 1:30 a.m. I had just gotten home from the bar and was fairly buzzed. I got myself a bottle of water, sat on the couch, and turned on Netflix. Shortly after, I heard my phone vibrating on the table. I remember being very confused because normally, the only person that ever called me were my parents. Everyone else texted me. And I knew my parents wouldn't be up this late. I looked at the phone. It said, "No caller ID." I've never seen that before and decided to send it to voicemail without giving it a second thought. A couple minutes went by and I got this voicemail notification. What the hell? I thought. It was a 2-minute voicemail. I listened to the whole thing. I could hear heavy breathing, but whoever it was never said anything. For whatever reason, this kind of freaked me out. Who would be calling me at this time of the night? Why was it coming across as no caller ID? It was very strange. I tried to forget about the phone call and lay down on the couch. A little while later, the phone started vibrating again. It was coming across as no caller ID again. This time, I picked up. Hello? Hi. Chills ran down my spine as I heard the voice. It was a man's voice. It sounded very robotic. Can I help you? Yes. Okay, I said, not knowing what to say at that point. Nothing but silence. A good minute passed, at least before I spoke again. Hello? Hi, he said again, in that same robotic tone. What do you want? I asked, starting to be annoyed, but still a little freaked out. And then he said something that almost stopped my heartbeat. I will see you soon. And disconnected the phone call. What the frack was that all about? What did he mean that he would see me soon? I thought about calling the police, but decided against it. It had to be some sort of prank. I decided to shut my phone off and head to bed. I woke up the next day around 10 o'clock. I turned my phone on and immediately noticed I had 2 missed calls and 2 voicemails. They were from the same no-caller ID shit that called me last night. I listened to the first voicemail. It was 2 minutes of just heavy breathing, the same as the voicemail I received at 2 a.m. I listened to the second. This one was different. There was no breathing at all. I couldn't hear anything for the first minute or so, and then I heard it. A raspy scream. So loud it hurt my ears. What in the hell? I once again debated calling the police. This man could be trouble. But why was he so calm when I was talking to him last night? And why the hell was it coming across as no caller ID? The cops would just think it was a prank and leave it at that. I laid in bed for a good hour thinking about this man before deciding enough was enough. I deleted the voicemails. I wasn't going to let this ruin my Saturday. It was a beautiful day out, so I decided to go for a quick bike ride before meeting my parents for dinner. I got back to my place around 6 o'clock. A coworker texted me a little while later, asking if I wanted to go out with some people from the office. I decided against it. I just wanted to stay home and relax. Around 9 o'clock, I get a phone call. It was from my boss. He told me that he was getting reports that a company website that I was responsible for was experiencing some network issues and wanted me to look into it. Just my luck, though. My office is only about a 10-minute drive from where I live, but I didn't want to be going in on a Saturday night. Not only did I have better things to do, but I also hated going into the office after hours. The office was always empty, dark, and most of all, creepy. I got to the office around 9:30. I used my badge to get in. As soon as I entered, I realized that I had no idea where the light switch was. I had only been there a few times after hours, and never this late at night. I was hoping there would be at least 1 or 2 others, since some department workers work long hours, odd hours. But of course not. I was here by myself. I used the flashlight on my phone to find my way to my cubicle, booted up my computer, and started praying that this thing would be an easy fix. The computer screen lit up, and I began checking some basic settings and went through some basic troubleshooting steps. I hadn't even been in the office for 5 minutes before my desk phone rang. This was the strangest thing. None of my contacts would call me after hours. The higher-ups all had my cell phone number if they needed to get a hold of me, and nobody else would even be working this late. I looked at the screen. To my disbelief, it was coming across as no caller ID. No way, I remember thinking. This is too fucked up. I sent them to voicemail and continued working. At this point, I couldn't even think straight. I was contemplating just heading back home ASAP. I was completely devoted to the work when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around in my chair and looked down the hallway. I don't know why, because it was too damn dark to see anything anyway. I shined the cell phone light in the direction. I didn't see anything. My heart was beating 99 miles per hour at this point. Just then, my phone started ringing out loud, scaring the bejesus out of me. I had enough. Without even turning on my phone flashlight, I ran, hitting multiple cubicles and chairs on my way, but I didn't care. I somehow got to the exit and ran to my car without looking back. I drove straight home. I got to my apartment, my heart still racing, and right on cue, my phone rang. No caller ID. I answered the phone. Leave me alone! I'll see you soon. What do you mean? Who are you? Look, if you don't stop calling me, I will call the cops. Just then, I heard footsteps coming from my bedroom. Holy shit, there's someone inside my house. How the hell did they get in? The call got disconnected again. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed the sharpest knife in the case. I needed to defend myself. I could hear footsteps in my bedroom, and as I opened the door, I saw a man standing in my room. The room window was wide open, so it wasn't hard to guess how he got in. He was about 7 feet tall and was wearing a rainbow-colored woman's swimsuit that made him look deranged. His gray eyes gave me the creeps, and he had red lipstick smeared on his face. I grabbed the knife tight in case he came onto me, but what he did next still haunts me to this day. He slowly lifted his body by getting on his toes, which made him look even taller and gigantic. He then looked up and said in a raspy voice, "There are times when all I can think about is murdering someone. Oh, how they will gag once I shove my socks into their mouth. How they will choke once I start to strangle them. It's so thrilling to know how much blood runs in your veins. Would you like to see your veins? I could cut them open for you." "I'm gonna call the cops if you don't leave right now." He gave me a sinister smile and then said, "I have my methods of dialing numbers and pranking people, but if someone seems interesting, I can't stop myself from hurting them. Do you think you can help me?" I realized this man is mentally unstable, and if I don't do something, he was going to snap at any moment. "Oh, okay. Everything's fine. Just wait here, okay? You are going to call the cops, right?" No, I just... "You are lying. This whole world is filled with bloody liars. I won't let anyone put me in a madhouse again." Saying this, he jumped out of the window and ran away, disappearing into the darkness of the night. I called the cops, finally. Based on my description, they showed me a photo of a recently escaped convict who is a sociopath murderer as well. Without any doubt, I identified the man. The cops are still searching for him, and I have no idea how he calls me and traps his victims. But if you get any suspicious phone calls, don't wait long enough like me. I'm lucky to be alive, even after facing that crazy killer.